Dr. Booz. We're very lucky to have him on campus. He himself is an organic farmer, as well as a real expert in the legal field and a very highly trained philosopher as well. And he has 3 times won our students' favorite teaching award in 2010, 2011, and 2012. He has a BS in philosophy as well as I believe also a BA in philosophy, which I think fell off of my list here because it was so long. A master's in applied philosophy at Bowling Green State, PhD in philosophy from Marquette, a JD in law from the University of Wisconsin, and an LLM, which is like a master's in law, yet beyond your JD, in international law from the University of Wisconsin. He has also recently received an international appointment with the African Union to serve as an advisory council for their international law division. This appointment recognizes his work in Tanzania as a Fulbright scholar since 2003 on land tenure laws, the rights of women and pastoralists, and most recently, human rights issues that relate to albinos. And he also has traveled to Tanzania numerous times and worked to beginning university there with his wife, Dr. Corinne Booz, and their children. He's a 20-year volunteer instructor for the American Red Cross. He served in Haiti and Tanzania as a Catholic lay missionary worker in inner-city hospitals and AIDS clinics and so on. And as I mentioned, he currently operates an organic farm in our community out in the Holy Land. He is a very well-respected instructor on our campus, and I could go on, but I won't because then that would cut too much into his time. So thanks again for coming, and thank you, Dr. Booz.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending. I'm going to do 3 things today. The first thing I'm going to do is an 8-minute presentation that's going to be very academic, very scholarly. I'm going to do that for 2 reasons. One, to show you that, especially for our college students here at UW-Fond du Lac, this is what academics engage in. This is what's expected of us at that level. This is what we would do at a philosophy conference or an academic conference. The second reason I'm going to do it is because it's going to serve as an example for what's wrong with sustainability. And then I'm going to move into a 22-minute presentation giving my background and hopefully establishing my credibility in the area of agriculture. And I'm going to talk about how we need to return to Plato's views from 350 BC. We have absolutely missed the book on this because he did have a philosophy of sustainability. And if Plato is right, we might be in trouble as a culture. If he's right, and also if we study him, then we should be able to see practical ways to avert the disaster that's looming on the horizon. And then finally, I'll wrap it up with a 10-minute conclusion, and that should leave us at least 10 or 15 minutes for some questions. So without further ado, I'll launch into the academic portion of the presentation. And again, for our students, this is what we do at philosophy conferences or academic conferences, so to be erudite scholarship. So bear with me and see what you can pick up from it. Developing a philosophy of sustainability has been problematic for us as a nation. The philosophical roots of sustainability as a conceptual approach to human existence in the Western tradition of science can be traced to the pre-Socratic thinkers of the 6th century BC, known as cosmologists, who sought the harmonious interaction of humans and the natural world. These thinkers specifically aimed at establishing a balance. In Greek, it's known as homeostasis, a balance within the individual person and a balance between the person and the natural environment. And that was the goal of their pre-Socratic philosophy. How do we find balance? Their efforts to establish homeostasis between humans and the natural environment carried specific implications both for the health of humans and for the health of nature. The classical Greek notion of health as a balance between man and nature and mind and matter was bolstered by Aristotle's theory of hylomorphism and his metaphysics. Aristotle's quest for proper balance extended to all disciplines, and his contributions in rhetoric, logic, ethics, biology, metaphysics, aesthetics, medicine, and political science made him the preeminent representative of a specific scholarly approach to life, an approach which the later scholastic thinkers in the medieval period shaped into the liberal arts tradition. The liberal arts tradition served as the framework for the early universities of Europe and was the model which helped give rise to the Enlightenment. facilitated by great advances in science and thought from individuals such as Descartes, Bacon, Galileo, Copernicus, Newton, Leibniz, Spinoza, and others, Western science, as practiced in the academic institutions, experienced a shift in the epistemological paradigm. The epistemological paradigm is basically, how do humans know what we know? What is our thought process? What does it mean to be a thinking being? The classical Greek sense of balance, homeostasis, was stripped of its commitment to metaphysics in the medieval period and in the academy, and that was equally important, not as equally important as the physics and the academic approach to science. And it began to distance itself from the liberal aspects of the liberal arts tradition, which is why in the modern era we have a hard time rediscovering the liberal arts. Calls for a return to the fullness of that liberal arts tradition have consistently been overshadowed by the accomplishments of science, accomplishments which for the most part have occurred in a sort of moral vacuum. Quite often the human community invents things that look great, but they have disastrous consequences that nobody seemed to be able to predict, and that is a problem of the academy. Again, the connection would be, without a strong liberal arts base bringing together the metaphysics and the physics, we seem to lose sight of our own inventions. The essence of this moral vacuum lies in the fact that the discipline, rigor, and arduous attention to detail, which is at the core of scientific advancement, has not been felt in equal measure in the complementary disciplines of philosophy, logic, rhetoric, ethics, morality, theology, spirituality, ontology, and metaphysics. One need only consider the status of such disciplines within the modern academy to gain a sense of the disparity in emphasis. This is going to be particularly important as we get into the philosophy of Plato, because one of the things that Plato says is that if you don't have an integrated curriculum, you are not being educated in a complete fashion, and your decisions will be uninformed and poor. The practical result of this shift in the epistemological paradigm of academia can be seen in various areas of human experience in the modern world where things are out of balance. Global climate change, toxic food supplies, pollution, hunger, poverty, disease, global economic crises, all serve to illustrate the inadequacy of our conceptual epistemological framework. While calls for sustainability have reached epic proportions, now flooding the academic landscape with conferences, workshops, plenary sessions, retreats, colloquia series, few of these focus on the methodological approach that they employ. Hence, concepts of sustainability, which are themselves products of the post-Enlightenment academic tradition, with its emphasis on the sufficiency of human reason to advance science productively for the benefit of humans, may prove to exacerbate the very condition they seek to alleviate. While most contemporary calls for sustainability focus on repairing the damage already done to nature to ensure our continued survival as a species, few focus on restructuring the learning environment to avoid repeating the cycle of damage and repair in the future. One philosopher in particular, Paul B. Thompson from Michigan State University, has tackled the lack of a consistent ethical treatment of sustainability from the epistemological perspective. In his work, Sacred Cows and Hot Potatoes, he develops an epistemological approach that treats sustainability as a moral ideal and tracks the confluence of three specific approaches to sustainability which are often in conflict: the resource sufficiency model, the functional integrity model, and the social science model. He attempts to ground sustainability in the commensurability of these three models based on specific philosophical ideals. For the purposes of my project here today, I will combine Thompson's approach with that of renowned sustainability expert Cal DeWitt from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. DeWitt identifies attitudes operative within American culture which are fundamentally unsustainable, and which are the root of our inability as a culture to define a coherent set of principles for sustainability. More to the point, DeWitt proffers that institutions are the root cause of such attitudes. That bears repeating. The root cause of our problems with sustainability are our academic institutions, especially educational institutions which employ deficient pedagogical models. His main contention is that educational institutions perpetuate attitudes of unsustainability by promoting the fragmentation and secularization of knowledge. DeWitt, quoting Wendell Berry on the matter, says, "The problem with humans is that they are only moderately intelligent." There's a spin on this. It's an old adage: a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Compartmentalization, specialization, and fragmentation of the curriculum lead to attitudes which are unsustainable, and this is the reason that we make no progress on developing a coherent philosophy of sustainability. The fractured nature of the educational system turns out producers and consumers together without positioning them intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally to resolve the inherent tension in the different concepts of sustainability. If the consumers and producers share identical epistemological frameworks, then there is no homeostasis within the academy or within the human community for that matter, because instead of cognitive balance, we end up with cognitive dissonance. Given this cognitive dissonance, people are incapable of generating or sustaining the reasoned discourse necessary for the fruition of the concept of sustainability. If the criteria to challenge science are developed by the scientific community, then the cycle will repeat. We will replace one threat with an even greater threat. A prime example of this can be seen in any nutritional assessment of the American diet. Toxins such as bisphenol A, partially hydrogenated oil, sodium nitrates, high fructose corn syrup, red and yellow dyes are tolerated because they occur in amounts per product that are below the national threshold for unsafe consumption established by the scientific community. If the threshold is altered, the scientific response is simply to replace the toxin with another toxin. More to the point, chemistry graduates at most prestigious institutions are rarely, if ever, required to take a course on chemical toxicology. So there's no sense of synderesis, which means the proper end of the subject to study, theory relative to the proper end or goal of the thing in question, and that doesn't guide their judicum, which is the means to that end. Calls for sustainability are then only minimally helpful as they fall short of helping humans develop an awareness and realization of the balance proper to our being. To improve this condition, the very concept of sustainability needs to be redressed in light of a more complete view of the human person. Therefore, a successful philosophy of sustainability will specifically address the idea of developing an epistemological paradigm for teaching sustainability in the modern academic institution. That should be about 8 minutes. Christy Wilkmore here, I would win the 8-minute competition. Now, the point of that was twofold. One, to show that this is what goes on at conferences regarding sustainability or philosophy, to let students have some insight into what we do as academicians. And the second is to simply point out that that's the problem. 8 minutes of verbiage from which you probably gain very little. That's the point. What we do in higher education doesn't seem to filter down to practical action. It's erudite scholarship, yes, and a few people might grasp it, but here's the main point of my presentation today. The average person in America doesn't have the critical thinking skills necessary to do the level of abstraction to understand sustainability itself. And there's reasons for that, and they're found in Plato's philosophy. And that's what I want to do in the second part of this presentation is get down off the academic pedestal and talk about the practical reality of sustainability. To do that, I first want to develop my own credibility just a little bit and hopefully have a little fun with this. I do have a 40-acre organic farm. It's out in St. Anna. Don't know if you know where that is, but it's a great steakhouse out there, Schwartz's. It's in the Holy Land, as Professor Harris said. And what we try to do is be as organic and sustainable as we possibly can. That means we try to reduce our carbon footprint. We try not to rely on fossil fuels. So we use older versions of tractors. Here's my son driving the tractor. And we use this for basic tillage and planting. And it's labor intensive, do everything by hand. We employ Rudolf Steiner's principle of biodynamics, which means we work a lot on plant compatibility and trying to get the plants to do some of our work for us. Academics such as myself are perfectly suited for farming because we're full of BS. We have a BS degree. We know what that means. And then we go and get a master's degree, which is MA, so there's more added. And then we get a PhD, which means we pile it higher and deeper. So we can grow things. We got what it takes. I sometimes bring my students out to the farm. I see at least one of them here today. And I try to give them some hands-on learning opportunities. So we can talk about biodynamics, we can talk about plant compatibility, we can talk about the biology, the chemistry, even the physics. We can do a completely academic exercise in the field while having fun at the same time. That would be what I was trying to point to in my 8-minute speech. Too much of academia is speeches like that, given in classrooms or giving at conferences, And people can only handle so much of that. But if you get them outside and get them doing something hands-on, the learning transfers much faster and much more completely. That's something I learned from Plato. Students, I think, had a pretty good time with it, and what they were planting there were some dry beans. What we do with the dry beans is at the end of the year, I have some more students come out to my farm, because that's free labor for me, and we harvest it, but the upside of that is everything that my students plant and everything that we harvest gets donated to the men's shelter here in Fondle. So it's a good project. It's service learning. This is Matt Meyer. He's one of my students that has taken several of my classes, and he's kind of a manure expert. And you can see it went from pretty much dirt to nice green, lush vegetation. These are my 4 permanent children. And you can see behind them, we grow a pretty good garden. Fall brings the harvest time when we can really see what we've done. Kids love that because, gee, out of nothing comes something, and it's an amazing process, and the kids really connect with that. Sometimes we win awards. This is my daughter's 37-pound cabbage, and no, we did not use Miracle-Gro. We don't use any chemicals on our farm. If you do things right, you can produce amazing things. This is my son with our tobacco crop. Yes, I do grow tobacco. I have tried to smoke it. It will kill you. Okay, it is not the kind of tobacco good for smoking. What we do with our tobacco is we chop it up, we make a tea out of it, we steep it in water, strain off the sediment, and then we use that on all of our fruit plants. Because the nature tells the rest of animals and insects, this is bad. Only humans think it's good. These are the kids having some fun on a wagon load of beans. We end up shucking lots and lots of beans. This is Zeke. He's my best bean shucker. We have bean shucking parties. It drives you nuts at some point. You get sick of the beans. And more beans. And some people have said to me that I'm full of beans. It's true. And we try to mix it up and have a little fun. Here's cutting some corn off of the cob, and we bag that up and freeze it. And we do some heavy lifting on occasion. 40 acres requires lots of manual labor. We got to pick some stones. We got to bale some hay. We got to bale some straw. The easiest part of our job is chickens. They take little or no effort, and they give us great results because we produce lots and lots of fresh, wholesome eggs. And you know the difference between chickens that are free range and eat grass and eat clover. The yolks are orange, as opposed to that pale yellow you get from the store. And you're getting so much more iron and phosphorus and magnesium and calcium, just really good. We do raise a lot of animals. This is my favorite part of the farm. On occasion, you have to counsel the animals because the end is near, and you have to tell them the truth. I found that to treat animals with dignity and respect, you got to let them know you're going to eat them. But they respond to it well, and you can see they give me their full undivided attention, unlike my students here. And we treat them, what we got left over from the orchard or whatever, we feed to the animals. Even notwithstanding the joy I have with the animals, this is still my favorite pig, Zeke. On occasion, we take on new projects. Now, this is one where my son started working for the corporate dairy up the road. It was a great learning experience for him. He was my insider. I put him inside the regime to see what's going on, and he came home and reported to me, and I documented it all. But he started bringing home these sickly calves that they discarded. These calves are known as martens. Martens are cows that don't have complete sets of sexual organs, reproductive organs, because they've been genetically modified so many times we've screwed up the biology, and they're very sickly, and so we're injecting them with penicillin. It's about the only thing we use as a chemical on our farm, just to get them back to health. And then, of course, we have to bottle feed them and take care of them, and it takes very labor intensive. And at some point, yes, we do sell the meat. So for those who might be squeamish, there's a slide coming up that you might want to look at. This is Devin. He's one of my students in environmental ethics. He's checking out his lunch, thinking that would be good to eat later. We do also raise lambs, and we do sell the lamb meat. And I see Professor Hussein is here, so I thought I'd put a slide in of him. He does actually come out to our farm, and he butchers the lambs. Sorry to say, but it's the reality of farm life. And we turn their full pelts into a very nice product. We do all the tanning ourselves, and you can cover your chair with these, put them in your office. We use them as throw rugs. They go on your bed. They're foot warmers. They're really nice. Sometimes we cut the wrong thing on the farm. Well, it's okay because I'm very good at giving stitches. I've given a lot of them. And we produce a lot of really neat stuff. We produce all of our own jams, our jellies. We make our own soap. We make our own shampoo. We make our own toothpaste. We try to make as much as we possibly can. Okay? Now, I will be honest. This is labor intensive. You can go to the store and get 10 times as much product as it costs us to make this. But what we have is an educational learning opportunity. And then on occasion, we bring students out and try to pass on some of this knowledge. And these are some of my students with my wife, and she's instructing them in the art of soap making. Mostly what we do on our farm is eat. The produce that we have is so good we can't pass it by. When we're done eating, we eat some more. And after we get done eating, then we eat some more. We get serious about our eating. And when we're tired of eating, we invite our friends over. This is Professor Hussein and some of his family members, and we say, hey, let's all get together and let's all eat. So really, farming is about eating. And what we do with all the knowledge that we acquire on our farm is, this is me in Tanzania, East Africa. I go overseas and I try to help people over there set up organic, sustainable farms. And so there's a nice sharing of the knowledge there. I set up all kinds of things in Tanzania, including orange groves and even vineyards. And on occasion, the vineyards are so successful, I get to sample the product. That makes it worth it to go to Tanzania. And our latest project is, you can see I'm holding one of these small albino children. We're now, you can see the foundation that we've got built. We're going to build a dormitory and a safe haven for them. I don't know if you know this, but albino children in Tanzania and many parts of Africa are hunted and killed for their body parts. They are literally dismembered. People use those body parts in witchcraft ceremonies. So we have set up a safe haven for them, and we've got 30 of them that we're taking care of right now. And all the profit from our farm here in Wisconsin goes directly to our work in Tanzania. Eventually, I hope I can get some UW-Fondy students to go with me on a few of these trips. Now, this was a particular moment where all my philosophy, all my study, all my scholarship, and then my alternative life as a farmer all came together. My son and I were in a marketplace in Tanzania. I was working with him on his Swahili. So I was asking him in Swahili, unakujua chakula bora? What good food do you want? And so I was using sentences. So I asked him, what good food do you want today? What good food do you want tomorrow? What good food do you want the next day? And I was making him respond. When we were practicing Swahili, we weren't really thinking or focusing on the food. And I heard a little girl, standing away from us, and she said to her mother, she tugged on her mother's dress and said, they must be rich. And the mother said, why? She said, they get to eat every day. And I heard this, and it just knocked me down. Because, and this is where we get into the real substance of my presentation, when we live here in the land of plenty, we have so much, we totally lose perspective. For me, it was nothing to buy food 3-4 days in advance, and I never thought that on planet Earth there's 2 billion people who get out of bed every day and don't know if they're going to eat at all. And so I had to, at that moment, I had to bring all my scholarship and then all my lived experience together and figure out, what do I need to do as a college professor to start shaping perspectives? How can I make this come alive? How can I make it real for my students? Sure, it was real for me in the moment because I was there and it hit me, but what do we got to do in terms of scholarship? And that led me back to Plato. Plato, who in 350 BC, when setting up his famous treatise called The Republic, talks about the natural progression of human society. And he actually predicts, and if you look at any empire or any civilization that's ever been successful, Plato nails it on the head. Every human community moves from subsistence agriculture to cooperative agriculture by virtue of our reason. We look around and say, hey, why should we all try to do the same thing? If we start specializing, we have a better life, and we enter the social contract, right? So we move from subsistence agriculture to cooperative agriculture to a luxurious state, and then something funny happens. And that's where I want to get into Plato's sustainability. What happens after we develop the luxurious state? Plato gives us lots to think about in terms of the operation of the human mind, and here's a couple of quotes from him that I think are very accurate and very telling of who we are. Especially that second sentence. Why is it so difficult for us to see the good. Or, better yet, when we see the good, why is it so difficult to act on it? And I'll be the first one to admit, I have a nice, sustainable, organic farm. 95% of everything we eat on the farm comes off my farm, but I find it almost unbearable to drive down Johnson Street without pulling into Culver's for some custard. Why? I know I don't need that, but what happens? Where's the epistemological breakdown in my thought process that keeps me reaching for those things which rationally I would identify as not in my best interest? Wow. In other words, why does it take us a quintuple bypass surgery before we give up the hamburgers? Why? That's the question. And that's for all of us. Some people are better at this than others. Some people are more sustainable than others. Some people have critical thinking skills and have no problem choosing the apple on the left for their lunch. I'm not one of those people. I look at that and I go, yes, I know the apple is obviously what I should have for lunch, but boy, would I like to have that double burger. And even though I teach this stuff and I know the real value of that double burger, which we'll get into, sometimes that choice is hard to make. So what is that thing inside of us that keeps us from doing the right thing more than we actually do? More evidence. We can give people all of the scientific information and show them that stopping at McDonald's for breakfast is really a bad idea. You're just adding to your ability to get cancer. You're facilitating it. Yet, I'll be the first one to admit, sometimes when you don't have time to fix anything at home, that really hits the spot, especially since McDonald's has really good coffee. It's like, wow. But what is it about us as humans that we can know the facts, we can know the science, and still not choose the right thing? For Plato, it's a problem of epistemology. And basic human epistemology is this. We are sentient creatures. We live by our five senses. Information comes to us through our five senses. They're impressions. Impressions go in, and we kick them around inside of our mind, and that forms ideas. And ideas, then, are the source of our behavior. Now, knowing that, we ought to be able to strengthen the ideas of health and sustainability and homeostasis and avert some of these behaviors, yet we haven't quite found it yet, which relates back to the first 8 minutes of my presentation. Something's wrong in our learning process. How is it the case that we're not raising generations of young people who can take control of this process and make better decisions? Now, the key to this process is ratiocination, big long word, which basically means we're all equipped with a filter. Every human has a filter mechanism in their mind so that some impressions come in, you can kick them out. Here's the trick. We don't control the filter. For the most part, the filter controls us. What critical thinking means by definition is empowering people to take control of that filter. That's what we ought to be doing in higher learning, and we're not. We talk about critical thinking, but it's not integrated into our curriculums, and that's back to my main point. The educational institutions of higher learning don't have integrated curriculums that are empowering our students to choose differently. We are too compartmentalized, too disjointed, too separate, and that's a problem that Plato identified. For students in the crowd, you're always concerned with how to write your paper. Here's what you want to do. You want to have a thesis statement, right? A thesis statement is a statement that contains both your conclusion and your premises all in one sentence that expresses the problem. So you ask, what's the problem? Well, the problem is we don't have a coherent philosophy of sustainability. When you ask yourself as students why, anything that comes after the because is a premise to your argument. So your conclusion is the first part, your premise is the second part, and you can keep adding on components. When you write your papers, you gotta come up with a thesis statement. Now, if you do this, even Professor Peterson will give you a B-. You've got to work at having a coherent thesis which contains the premises to your argument. So what I would do if we had longer is I would farm out everything that comes after the because. Anything that's an explanation is a premise. And I would farm those out individually and develop them scientifically and put in my information, and then I would bring back that conclusion at the end of my paper, and it would be rock solid. Somebody could argue with your premises, but they can't refute your conclusion. That's just a tip for you college students. Cake, one of my favorite things. Let's talk about cake. So back to this problem that Plato presents us with. There was a fantastic study done by Stanford University where they took volunteers and they asked them to memorize numbers. Some of the volunteers, participants in the study, were given 2 numbers, 2 digits. Some were given 7. The trick was they had to go out of the room, down the hall, into another room and report their number. Except, in the process of going down to the next room, a young lady stopped them and offered them a choice between a bowl of fruit or a piece of chocolate cake. Here's the amazing thing, and this is really, really important for us to wrap our brains around. Almost every person that was given 7 digits chose the cake. Almost every person that was only given 2 digits to memorize chose the fruit. And this is a random sampling of people off the street. What does it tell us about how the human mind operates? Quite simply, when you are preoccupied with lots of information in the front of your brain, you make poor choices. When you're not preoccupied, you have confidence and you're stronger morally, and you make a better choice. Now that's not to say that cake is evil and you should never eat it, or fruit is the best and you should always eat it. It's simply to point to a basic human problem. If you're preoccupied, if you're distracted, you have what the Greeks call akrasia, moral weakness. You make a choice that's probably not in your best interest. Okay, this is no surprise to those of us in the UW Fond du Lac community, because we've been studying Michael Pollan for 6 years now, and we've talked about sustainability for 6 years. We know what Pollan gives us in terms of information. The average grocery store in America now has 40,000 products. There's no surprise. They know what the problem is, and they know how to exploit it. If you give people consumer overload, they make poor choices. That's all they're doing. How many ways can you package oats and wheat into cereal? There's no reason a cereal aisle needs to be that long. What are they doing? Overloading you so you make poor choices. It's an amazing scientific study, but it works. And it breaks people down. Now, there's more to it, right? There's more to it. What can we say? Plato described the human soul, and he's talking about soul in the classic Greek sense as the animating power of your being. Everybody has soul. But your soul is divided, says Plato. 70% of the time, you are concerned with your needs. That's the nutritive soul. You want food, water, shelter, companionship. Basic human needs. That's 70% of your soul's activity. 29% of the time, give or take a percentage point, you are interested in your appetites or your desires. Now this is really simple. If you're living in Tanzania and your needs aren't met, how many desires do you have? 1. Your needs to be met. If you're living in America, the land of plenty, and all of your needs are met like that every day, what happens to your soul? It becomes preoccupied with desire. Now you're spending 6 hours a day on the internet looking at God knows what, and being totally unproductive and eating a bag of chips and drinking soda. Why? Because you can. Why? Because your needs are met. You don't have to lift a finger. This is really important to understanding what we are as rational beings. Plato says only 1% of the time are we rational. That might be generous. What is he getting at? Look, if your needs are met, you're going to start developing desires. And it's like St. Augustine said, the faster you satisfy your desires, the bigger they become. And the bigger they become, the more you change your perspective and attitude on your needs. So now we live in a society where people cannot distinguish between needs and wants. What would be the best thing for all of us? A total economic collapse so that nobody's needs are met. We have to rethink ourselves. Well, that's a little bit strong, isn't it? We don't really want that to happen. No, we don't, but that's the quickest way to get people's heads on straight. You don't know what your needs are until you've been completely deprived. Wow, now you can figure it out. But when you have all your needs met and your desires are running rampant, you can't focus. And it seems to be the case, and this is Plato's next step, as goes the individual soul, so goes society. So now you've got 70% of the population, which Plato referred to as slave. Now don't take that in the pejorative sense of slavery with chains and whips and importing people from different continents. Slavery simply means people who don't have critical thinking skills. They don't have the critical thinking skills sufficient to determine between their needs and their wants, so they become slaves to their desires. And who better to feed the desires of society than the entrepreneurial class? Are corporations giving us what we need, or are they giving us and telling us what we want? And ultimately corrupting us, because out of our corruption they make more money. And oh, by the way, where's the guardian class? The reason of society, which would be reflected in your Supreme Court. I'll tell you where it is. Some of the guardians in New York about 18 months ago decided soda is the leading cause of obesity in America. We need to clamp down on soda. They passed a law that said no more soda in cups bigger than 16 ounces. How they thought this would work, I don't know, because the average slave is just going to get 2 cups and fill them both up. So what the size of the cup has to do with it, I don't know, but they tried. They tried to pass a law that would change people's impressions, to change their ideas, to change their behavior. Soda is killing us. Wow. What did a federal appeals court say? That's unconstitutional. Soda manufacturers can sell it in any size container they want. So our guardians abandon us. Consistently. Now this is a political problem, which I will leave to my peers in the political science division. But it's really important to ask, why are we not regulating more? And people will say, because liberty and freedom is an American value. Well, okay, let's look at an example. European Union states that belong to that configuration, that political configuration, lead happier, healthier lives by all known statistics. They just live longer and live better. They also have a very paternalistic legal structure, which does not allow them to sell genetically modified food, food with partially hydrogenated oil, food with red dye, yellow dye, blue dye. Not going to happen. So there's a political problem here for us in America. And it does bring together values that are sacred, values that we hold near and dear. What's missing, says Plato? Virtue. Every aspect of your soul has its attendant virtue. And the way out of any problem is to start exercising your virtue. Well, that's exactly what's missing. Our nutritive soul should be practicing temperance, which means moderation. Constantly challenging ourselves. Do I need this? Do I need this? Do I need this? We don't do that. The appetitive soul, or the professional, the entrepreneurial class, should be exercising moral courage. As manufacturers, they should ask, do people need this? Should I be selling them this? It would take courage for them to cut their corporate profits and not sell us that stuff. They don't have that courage. And the guardian class, the attendant virtue is wisdom. I don't know if you're watching what's going on in Washington, D.C., but I think this is self-evident. There's not a lot of wisdom. Where is it headed? Well, as Plato says, states rise out of the needs. We've already talked about this a little bit. The fundamental need of humans is food, so the origin of any state is going to be food. We move from subsistence agriculture to cooperative agriculture, and that means this. Here's my young friend Joseph. He's tilling that very field that I was later standing by that had all the nice cabbage growing. That lifestyle is not desirable. That's 8 or 10 hours a day in the hot sun in Africa versus an air-conditioned cab where you're feeding the world. Now Plato says this is rational. This is reasonable. This is what you do as thinking beings. You don't choose this. You move toward this. That makes perfect sense. However, we don't think about the consequences of choosing the other paradigm. While it's true that necessity is the mother of our invention, what it leads to is a highly technical and specialized society. I don't think I need to elaborate on that point. We have the most specialized society in the world. In fact, as I said in my first 8-minute part of this presentation, it's what's killing academia. We have specialized to the point where our curriculum is not integrated. We all live in our own little departments and we shelter ourselves and we're not integrated. There's no free-flowing exchange of ideas. How's that a problem? Well, it's going to lead to people having bigger and bigger desires, says Plato. They won't be satisfied with what they're getting today. They want something bigger and better tomorrow. It will develop a very luxurious state and a consumer-driven economy, but there are going to be consequences. What are the consequences? Education is going to be concerned with attending to those desires rather than defeating them. You won't get educators challenging students to give up their desires, give up their iPad, give up their cell phone, give up their car, walk to school. No, You'll get educators that are more concerned with how to incorporate the technology into their classroom so they can meet the students where they're at. Perhaps that's the wrong direction to go. Perhaps we need chalkboards again and not PowerPoints. If you want sustainability, you have to live it. You have to model it. Virtue cannot be lectured. It has to be lived. Age of specialization. Let's be real specific about what happened in the United States. Pretty easy to see what happens. I'm sure that Professor Harris could just go off on a tangent on this. It's basically exactly as Plato predicted. Once you start to specialize, you'll have this exodus. People will no longer be engaged in the wholesome community building agricultural activity. They'll flock to cities and take factory jobs. Well, that sounds good, but there's a downside to it. Once you start living at this level, you can't turn it down. You can't go back in time, or at least not without lots of social pain. What are some of the downsides of this specialization? Well, Joseph doesn't have a very good life. He's living, but it's not getting better. We have a great life, but look at the consequences. In other words, the inputs that it takes to run that big combine and feed the world more than they need aren't sustainable. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of it, but recently there was a study done, and every river and watershed east of the Mississippi River has an increasing alkalinity level, which Professor DeMesis will tell you very quickly spawns all kinds of really bad, nasty bacteria. Wow. They're getting dangerous. There are some rivers out east where they have posted signs, don't even go near this river, don't let your dog go in this river, it will die. Those are some of the side effects. More side effects. This transition of specialization, yes, the focus is on efficiency. We have the most efficient agricultural system in the world. We are outproducing anyone. We can feed the world. It's great, but look at what it costs. The amount of chemicals that we're using has grown exponentially, to say the least. And there is a downside to all the chemicals. In 1950, we used 14 million tons of the petrochemical fertilizers. We're up to 50 million tons. Petrochemical means they're oil-based, which means we have a greater dependency on foreign oil because of it. Few of the problems, just a few of the problems. We haven't talked about many of them, and I don't intend to touch on them. I just want to do this in the spirit of Plato and give you the context. Where is the breakdown? What will happen further is eventually people are going to want more and more and more, and we can't keep up with the need. Now, one thing that's absolutely fascinating with Plato is he predicts that after we move from subsistence agriculture to cooperative agriculture to the luxurious state, you're going to move into a medical state. How does a guy in 350 BC predict that? He predict that you will need an attendant level of physicians. You will become a healthcare state. Folks, we're there. We're there right now. And further evidence, says Plato, is your educators will need doctors at the same rate as the general public. That's a clear indication of the failure of education. While we might look at the young lady on the left and say, oh, that's not a desirable state of affairs, and gee, on the right we've got our classic Chinese buffet, which there's several of them here in Fond du Lac. Is one really better than the other? And you have to look at all of the consequences of each lifestyle before you can make an assessment. So where are we at with it? Well, these are just a few of the problems in the United States. 1 out of 5 meals is going to be eaten in a car. That's not because they're on their way to a picnic. It's because they're in line at McDonald's. 1 in 3 children will eat fast food today. I don't know if you know much about fast food, but it's generally not very nutritious. We're now at 60%, and the Center for Disease Control actually has one statistic, which I haven't investigated yet, but they're putting it at 78%. 1 in 3 children, this is really, really troublesome. Center for Disease Control has concluded that 1 in 3 children born after 2000 will have diabetes. That's not an if, it's a will. Folks, 20 years from now, you won't have a workforce. You'll have 2 populations, those in wheelchairs and those pushing them. We have to do something, right? This is amazing how far we've fallen, how much we've corrupted our diet. Here's one of the main problems, and I want to focus on that for a little bit. Make sure I'm staying on track here for questions. We eat way too much red meat. There's just no surprise in this. 1979, President Jimmy Carter came on television. He begged the American public, folks, stop eating so much red meat. We're lapsing into a healthcare state. This is bad. If we could just cut back, we will also solve our problem on dependency on foreign oil. We laughed at Jimmy Carter. President Reagan took office and immediately gave subsidies to beef producers. Took the solar panels off the White House and said, sustainability, are you kidding? That's some hippie notion. We don't want that. Well, now we have the highest rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and many other illnesses in the civilized, industrialized world. 1 out of every 6 of our dollars in this economy is spent on healthcare. It's not good looking forward. Other examples of how we've become completely and totally unsustainable. USDA puts our rate of waste somewhere around 105 to 110 billion pounds a year. Okay, now here's one of the problems I was talking about. These numbers mean nothing to the average person. They're just abstractions, and as I laid out at the beginning of my presentation, the problem with humans is epistemology. We don't have the critical thinking skills to understand what this means. It doesn't mean anything to us. It's not tangible. It's not real. Okay, to try to give it some tangibility, that much food wasted is semi-trucks, 8 lanes wide, bumper to bumper from New York to Los Angeles. That's how much food we're throwing away. Now, maybe that's still too much of an abstraction. Well, look at what we do in terms of our basic households and the poor economies we have in our households. We're throwing away packaged food. That's an attitude that is just, to me, very calloused and indifferent toward the rest of the world and the plight of humans. And yes, we can do it because we live in the land of plenty, but the problem is we don't even question ourselves whether we should do it. It's now just a right. And the problem is, it'll come back to haunt you. How's it going to come back to haunt us? Well, we're filling up our landfills with organic material that is pumping out methane at an astronomical rate, which is leading to global climate change, and it's not good. And it doesn't need to be the case, okay? Cows seem to be a bit of a problem, and we're at 1:20, so I'll expedite this next portion. It's not that cows and eating beef per se is bad, it's that the way we raise them is bad. The concentrated animal feed operations are really a nightmare, ecologically, environmentally, and they're just not sustainable. Here's what I mean by that. Half of all water consumption in the United States is going into animal production, meat production. Where a vegetarian diet would require 300 gallons a day, a meat diet requires 4,000. At some point in time, if there's no water, clean drinking water left, and somebody offers you a cheeseburger versus a gallon of water, I think your choice is obvious. The problem is that's tangible, that's real, then it's too late. How do we get people to wrap their minds around this reality before the disaster? That's always the classic question. National Geographic did a fantastic expose on where our water is going in society, and it's not just picking on the poor old cows. We have a lot of inefficiencies in our agricultural system where water is concerned. Why can we be so flippant and callous with our use of water? We're blessed. We have a lot of it. But it won't always be there. And we're not paying attention to Plato and homeostasis. Another problem that we have is a whole lot of energy is going into meat production. It takes a gallon of gas to produce a pound of red meat, and Jimmy Carter was right. Because look how many billion gallons of gas that results in. As Jimmy Carter said in '79, dependency on foreign oil, problem solved. Cut back on your red meat intake. He didn't say abandon it, he just said cut back. Now, if you know anything about basic human biology and nutrition, if we're eating on average 215 pounds per year, ask the basic question, how much of that do you need? The reality is, well, your amino acids, your polypeptide bonds, your basic protein assimilation requires that you eat about a pound a month, 4 times a month, have a 4-ounce serving. That's what you need as a human, and probably you could get by on a little less than that. So we could eliminate 200 pounds of red meat per person per year. Gas crisis solved. Now what else goes into this gas crisis? Now we come back to the political question. Well, since we don't have all that much oil here, where are we getting it? Dun, dun, dun. What does Plato tell us? The conclusion for Plato is you move from subsistence agriculture to cooperative agriculture to the luxurious state to the medical state to the military state. You will have to use your standing army to procure the resources that your population now thinks it needs. And war, says Plato, is not only inevitable, it's a point of no return. Once you use your army to get the resources you need to feed your desires and your appetites, it's a point of no return, says Plato. Wow. The age of specialization is such that as so goes the soul, so goes the society. Each man has one job or one art form. Each society has one job or one art form. What's Plato's conclusion? Your art form will be war. Wow. Now, that seems rather dark, and I don't want to end on that dark of a point. But it's what Plato is predicting. So you can ask yourselves, if we continue down this path of totally unsustainable living, will we end up in a war state or a state that must always wage war in order to feed its appetites? That would be Plato's logical conclusion. The good news is, I think, from Plato, if we understand what he predicted, we should be able to avert the disaster by reforming our educational system. We've got to get back to a liberal arts curriculum which integrates critical thinking and ethical thinking in every class. No more compartmentalization, specialization, segregation, discipline by discipline. We've got to come together as scholars and reconceive of the problem. We can't each on our own form a philosophy of sustainability. That's not sustainable. We've got to do something different. I was going to say a little bit more, I'll skip these, but the political problem is even more complex because you've got a federal government which you can clearly see subsidizes the meat industry, not the vegetable industry. So, in a sense, politically, we're choosing to further people's poor choices. We're not even coming close to sustainability. I'll skip the parts of the beef industry and how bad it is and negative it is, and just come back to Plato. I will say this. Other places on the planet are also having this problem. It's not just an American problem. China right now is clamoring for more beef. It's a sign of wealth, it's a sign of status. So Plato, once again, is correct. When they move into a beef-centered or a meat-centered diet for 1.6 billion people, watch out. There's no way Mother Earth can sustain that. But that's the direction they're going, and they're saying, look, you did it, why can't we do it? That's what we want to do. That could be a problem. There are some alternatives. We can go to grass-fed, we can go to less beef in general, but grass-fed is very helpful. Stop using so much grain production to feed the beef, get away from the concentrated feed operations. We can do things like start turning that excrement into energy sources, although we can't do it here because what we're collecting at the concentrated feed operations can't be used because it won't burn because it's liquid. And liquid manure is a real joy for those of you who have seen it spread or been around it. But this is a direction we could go if we needed to. And one of the problems is this. We'll wait until there is a disaster, but then we're very good at responding, right? Then we get really smart really fast. Again, Plato's prediction in a nutshell, you can look at this and say, well, politically and socially, the outcome is the same. And then all you got to do is go back in history, and Professor Harris could help you with this, but just ask a basic question. Every great human empire that's ever existed collapsed. And they went right down this progression. So you got to ask, where are we, and where do we want to be, and what do we need to do in order to avoid ending in a tyranny? All is not lost, however, because our scientists might pull off some magic. If we can make that beef taste like Brussels sprouts, problem solved. With that, I'll end. Thank you very much for your attendance and be happy to entertain questions.